What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Broadway Joel, the voice of Dominican boxing, and today we got a really good interview. I'm going to be interviewing Al Bernstein. He is the color commentator for Showtime Boxing. This is exciting stuff. He is definitely one of the best in the game, one of the best in history. If we're being honest with you, he there's very few commentators who's been in the game as long as he has, and I'm sure he has a lot of interesting stories to share with us. He did text me he will be a few minutes late, so I didn't want to keep you guys hanging. I did say we were going to start at 1 o'clock, but unfortunately, he's having I'm not sure why he's going to be late, but he said he's going to be running a few minutes late. So in the meanwhile, we'll talk about today. How today's actually a big day in Dominican boxing. Uh, Alberto Puello is having his hearing with the Nevada State Athletic Commission. So today is the day they will make a decision. I believe today is the day they will be making a decision as to if he took those substances due to him wanting to have a kid and that because that's the claim that that Puello came out with, like, hey man, I was trying to have a kid, I was taking these substances, and that's why I tested positive. So today is the day that they will be, you know, making a decision. Puello's going to bring some paperwork allegedly to see if he could provide some evidence, and you know, and then depending on what evidence he provides, we'll see if he can get cleared. If he's found guilty, if they say, hey man, the paperwork is fake, or he doesn't bring paperwork, I have no idea what would make him not get how do I say, not get suspended, but he would be you know let just today's the day that we find everything out. So we'll see again tonight at 7 p.m. I will be having on Jake Donovan. He's going to be hopping on to give a full breakdown as to what happened in the hearing, as well as what, how, if he's suspended, how long the suspension is, or why he was found not guilty, or what paperwork was presented, why it was accepted, why it wasn't, whatever happens later on today, as far as in the hearing. Me and Jake Donovan will be discussing it later tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. So I'm looking forward to that interview as well. But in the meanwhile, while we wait, I'm gonna put the link up. Just while we wait, because I'm not sure. He just told me he was gonna be a few minutes late, and I communicated with him. He hasn't responded. Let me just hit him up real quick. Okay. What? Hold on. My video's a little blurry. I don't looks fine on my end. Hold on. I don't know. It might be your phone. You might got an Android. I bet you got an Android. My video looks fine to me on my end. Hold on 1 second. Boom. All right, there we go. Okay, just give me 1 sec, guys. Yeah, I don't know, man. Get that. Yo, bro, we in the new century, man. Stop with the Android shit. Get a fucking iPhone, bro. You're looking crazy out here. All right, looks like he's gonna be hopping on soon. Just give me 1 sec, guys. Obviously, uh, when you deal with a little bit of older people, Hold on 1 second. All right, boom. Uh, all right. So he will be hopping on in a uh in a bit. Yeah, everybody's saying it's good. Everybody's saying it's good. I don't know, Ari, man. I'm telling you, yeah, you'll never buy an Apple product. That's why you'll never get full quality. But yeah, Al Bernstein. I just we're communicating. He's about to hop on soon. He's about to hop on soon. So I won't. I was gonna throw the link up while we wait because I wasn't sure how late he was gonna be, but he's gonna hop on in a few minutes. Uh, and we'll get this interview going, man. I did a lot of research. I did a lot of preparation for this. So I'm really looking forward to getting his story. You know, and yeah, and it's dope that I'm getting these two dudes back to back. These are like two, you know, for my era, my generation. These two people have commentated pretty much every big fight in the last 30 years, 40 years. At least one of these two men were commentating in pretty much every big fight in the last 30, 40 years. And I'm having them on my show. Uh it literally one on Monday, one on Wednesday, 2 days apart. So that's pretty interesting. I'm definitely gonna get a lot of historical giving my subscribers a lot of historical information, a lot of historical stories and stuff like that, and insight that we never looked at, like from a commentator's perspective. And how one of the things I liked from the Jim Lampley one was like how he was saying how when he was commentating the George Foreman one, he kept reminding himself, don't make it about you, don't make it about you, don't make it about you, because you know he this was George's moment. And that's kind of like, at the time, I kind of didn't look at it like that. I kind of looked at it like, hey man, you're commentating, this is a co-worker of yours who's fighting on the network where you work, not necessarily making it about you, but saying, hey man, I'm so happy to see my friend up there, or something like that. Yeah, it's interesting. I really enjoyed the Jim Lampley interview, and I'm really looking forward to this one. Al Bernstein is definitely a legend. He's a Hall of Famer, literally a Hall of Famer. So, uh, this is I'm having a Hall of Famer on my show. It's pretty good, pretty good. Edison Garcia, que lo que, mi hermano. Te veo ahí. Hold on one second. All right. Give me one sec, guys. Hold on. He says I ain't. Hmm. That's interesting. I don't know. All right. All right, guys. He's having a little bit of trouble with the link. All right. Never mind. Never mind. Never mind. Okay. Okay. All right. So he's going to be hopping on within the next minute or two. So please excuse the wait. As you guys know, not all these beginnings are so smooth and so smooth. But I always usually get them there. I've had very few cancel on me. I had who'd I had? I had Mini Pac-Man one time have Wi-Fi issues and he couldn't hop on. I had a Shushu who forgot he was gonna be giving me an interview, and then I had a Cesar Francis who kept trying to like, oh, later, 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 later. I'm like, yo, bro, I gotta go to work. The reason we agreed on this time because it worked for both of us, and he was like, nah, so he can't hop on. So I've had some people not hop on, but for the most part, people do come on. Maybe they don't come on the time they said they was gonna come on, but usually I'm pretty good at doing this, man. Muchas gracias, Edison. Yeah, that's right. While we waiting, man, don't hesitate to hit that like button, man. Support the channel. Right now, I'm having some problems with the demonetization, situation. So I don't know why that's happening, but I put my Cash App and my Zelle running across the bottom right now. I'm not sure. I got demonetized over something totally ridiculous. My page has been demonetized, and so since I can't get as super chats how you guys usually send me super chats, I put my Cash App under there. If you guys feel like I'm doing a good job and want to support the channel, go send me a Cash App. If you don't have Cash App, but you have Zelle, you have a Chase account, a Bank of America account, a Citibank, Wells Fargo's, and you want to send me $5-10, hey man, just Zelle me. It's my email address. It will be greatly appreciated. Until I figure out how to get my channel back to being monetized, you guys won't be able to send me super chats. But until then, those are the two avenues if you guys want to support the channel. Or if you want to take it a step further and support me, you go to BroadwayJoel.com. You buy yourself a Dominican boxing shirt, man. I definitely want you guys to support the shirts, man. Support the shirts, so that way when we finally do get a big fight here in New York City regarding with Dominicans on it, and we want to get our whole crowd, and we want to all be wearing something so we could look a little uniform, man. Dominican boxing, man. Go to BroadwayJoel.com. Buy yourself a shirt. I'm missing some sizes, but I will be replenishing the inventory sometime soon. But yeah, those are the three ways right now. Oh, all right. I got my man Al Bernstein on. All right. Al, thank you so much for giving me the time. It's an honor to interview you.
You're more than welcome.
All right. So yeah. First, I just want to say you're an absolute legend, Hall of Famer. I mean, it's like just pretty much half of the big fights when it weren't on HBO, they were on Showtime. So your voice is tied to a lot of historical fights throughout the year. So it's definitely a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thank you. It's funny. Sometimes I'll, I don't know, fights will pop up for whatever reason, whether on YouTube or somehow, and all of a sudden, I'll hear my voice and I'll say, "Wow, I did that." I can't, it's like, really, I did that. And so sometimes it's kind of surreal. And you're right. There were, of course, many that I didn't do, but there were a lot of major fights, especially in the '80s, and then even up through the '90s and 2000s that I was able to do. So it was a joy.
Yeah. All right. So I kind of want to get a little bit of a biographical interview with you. So I kind of want to start all the way from the beginning. You're from Chicago, correct?
I am indeed.
Yeah. Tell me what Chicago was like in the 50s and 60s, like a time where you grew up.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in the south side of Chicago, and I grew up in an area called Gage Park that was very, back in those days, Chicago was a very neighborhood-oriented city, but it was also a very segregated city, and so and then people tended to gravitate to locations sometimes based on religion, sometimes based on many other demographic things that you can imagine. And so I lived in this area that was primarily white and Catholic. Okay, so it was really an interesting time back then when I grew up, because the city was just starting to kind of, the civil rights movement was becoming, more, was continuing to be more vocal. The city was starting to change. And so that was one element of my childhood and moving forward into my teen years that was kind of an overriding story, a little bit about all that. However, in general, I mean, I grew up with a single mom. My dad passed away when I was 11, and we lived in a little house in the southwest side of Chicago that my dad got because he was in World War II, and the Army, helped soldiers get, if they could, get into houses. And I had for the most part, a kind of interesting and good childhood.
Okay. All right. Did you have an amateur boxing career? I came across something, but it wasn't quite clear. Did you?
Yeah, I boxed in the Park District system in Chicago. There was the Park District had a lot of programs, and one of them, in fact, fight we just did with Kenneth Sims, who won in a brilliant fight with Batira Akhmedov, one of the best fights this year, I think. Kenneth Sims' dad trains fighters in the Park District system, and he grew up in the Park District system. And I did went there, and I had boxing within their system. They had fights and competitions, and that was where I boxed.
You did you ever go to the Golden Gloves?
No, I did.
No.
It's interesting. Sometimes what the Park District fighters seemed separate from the Golden Gloves, and so I never did. And then by the time I was thinking about it, it was really the time when I was stepping out of boxing. I was in college, and I uh, I was really at the point where there were so many other things in my life that were seemed pressing that the boxing I just couldn't sustain it.
Oh, did you fight or spar anybody that we would know? Like anybody significant?
You know, not like famous, but there were one of I think I boxed against. There was uh, the uh, the brothers in Chicago that were so well known for being officials, the O'Shea brothers. I don't know if you remember them. One of them I fought. They were because then they were amateur boxers, and but not really anybody. I've thought about it. Not really anybody super famous that they went on to be a great pro.
Okay. All right. So
I wish
how
I
did
had
you?
one of those good stories for you, right? I could either tell you I got knocked out by one of them or that I did something good, but like,
Yeah, yeah. No way of checking, I guess. So
yeah.
how did you get into boxing? How did you get into boxing?
Well, the so I was and I played baseball in high school, and I played basketball. I was on the baseball and the basketball team. One very undistinguished season in the high school football team. It was not my sport. Um, and to be perfectly honest, I think the reason I got into boxing is because of my father dying so early. I somehow felt this need to um, do something that I don't know, felt like I was taking control of something in life that I was, and I don't even know if it's a misguided uh, kind of way to say I wanted to kind of I almost felt weak that he died so young. There was nothing I could do about it, of course, but I felt psychologically, to be honest, I think I felt like I needed to do a sport like that as opposed to basketball and baseball to see if I could prove that I could just compete in that. I mean, I didn't think that at the time, but in retrospect, going back at it, at the time, I can tell you that the other reason was I loved boxing, and I thought it was an amazing sport, and I wanted to participate in it.
So so what it sounds like, it was kind of like a way of you toughening yourself up a little bit. Is that like?
Yeah, something. Yeah, it's hard to explain, but I wanted to do it because for it felt like it added to my self esteem somehow,
I got you.
if that makes any sense. And in the process, it was wonderful because there were I got to be around people that were great, uh, and I had a lot of good experiences from that.
Okay. All right. Uh, so what college did you go to, and what did you end up majoring in?
I went to the University of Illinois at Chicago Circle, and they didn't have a journalism school, so
Okay.
I majored in because we didn't really have the money to send me downstate to Illinois or were really almost anywhere else, and so we went to the commuter school, the University of Illinois, but the the campus in Chicago is called the Circle, and they didn't have journalism. I majored in speech and communications, but what I also did was get on the school newspaper,
Mm,
and I had been in my high school years. I was editor of the high school paper, so I got on to that the college paper, became sports editor, and ultimately became editor of the paper. And that was where, to be honest, I spent way more time at the newspaper than I did in classes. Um, yeah, and because I felt like that was what I was learning, and I wanted to go into journalism. So and it left me about, I don't know, 6 or 7 credits short of graduating, which I never felt obligated to go back and do, because I got a newspaper job after my senior year, and so just going back, so I couldn't. I was so anxious to take this newspaper job that going back and corralling those credits didn't seem uh, important to me. It was important to my mother, God bless her, who came from another generation and felt that college degrees were very important. So she was not pleased with my decision.
Maybe later down the line, you'll get those last.
Hey, maybe I'll go back for it. That's, see, now you got a good idea. That's what I'm going to do. If I retire from this, you know what? I'll just go back and get those credits. Make my mother feel good wherever she is.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So as you mentioned, in the '70s, you started working for a newspaper. You even worked for a few magazines. How did you like being a journalist? Because I'm a journalist myself.
Mm-hmm.
How was
Did
that
you start
experience for you
did
back
you
then?
start at print or digital? Did you start that way before you started doing these kinds of podcasts and things?
Yeah, I started off print. I worked for a few newspapers and magazines, but as you
Hmm.
know, journalism now does not pay.
It's different. It's very different. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's really hard to make a career out of it,
yeah,
So this is
yeah.
this is
You have
my
to almost
passion,
have to
and
move
I do it
into it.
this way. I like it. I like it. I like it this way. It's fine with me.
You
It's
like one?
I like it this way. It's I like it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I enjoyed. My goal was to be a sports writer for one of the daily newspapers, and for some reason, I just couldn't. I gained a lot of experience with the community newspapers over the course of. I worked for a decade uh, as a in the community newspapers, learner newspapers, which was the major one there, and we did 2 newspapers a week. It wasn't a daily paper, but it was a very successful chain of community papers, and I was I worked as a reporter, then I worked as news editor, and then eventually one of it was a chain of newspapers where they had about 5 blocks of papers that covered specific areas. So I was in the area just outside Chicago, it was in Skokie, and we had about 5 towns in our our domain, and I became managing editor of that part of the newspaper. And all the while, I'm doing hard news, uh, and I want to do sports, so I started freelancing with sports and doing stories for the Washington Star. I did stories for, and I ultimately wrote for Ring Magazine, just covering fights, those little sections they had. And then I started writing for KO Magazine, which doesn't exist anymore, and that's where I really got a chance to write some stories that where I would cover major fights, and that was really cool.
Oh,
I
awesome.
like being a journalist, but it was it 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 comes, as you know from doing it, it comes with uh, certain um, obligations and certain things that make it that grind you a little bit, right? And I was, when I became the editor, then I really felt like I wasn't writing as much because I was editor, and I had these people working for me that were all older than me. I was in my 20s, which is ridiculous that I was managing editor in my 20s. So these people were all older than me. That felt odd, and I had trying to figure out a way to get through that was interesting. But I wouldn't trade those years though, because I really feel like it was an important part of my life. I feel like I did the job well as a community newspaper editor, which is different than being, a daily newspaper editor. And I to this day I'm proud of what I did. But when I got done with it, I said I'm not doing this anymore. You know, I just said, you know what, I'm going to do something else, and that was when the ESPN thing kind of
Yeah.
came about.
Yeah, actually, that was actually going to be my next question. So that was a great lead in. So in 1980, you
Hmm.
started working with ESPN. First, how did you get the job?
Yeah, here's the thing. First, we have to remember that ESPN at that time was not the ESPN of now. It was a They were in about 3, 4 million homes nationally, really, which now seems ridiculous, right? But that was the way it
Hmm.
was. Cable TV was just beginning. And they had, they were going to they were going to do the Top Rank Boxing Series. And they were going to have 4 fights in a month in different cities, like total in New Jersey, Chicago, Las Vegas, and one other city. And I saw the story in the newspaper. And I had written before then. I had written a book called Boxing for Beginners, which
Okay.
was out. So okay. So I only say that because it's part of the story. So I get I look at this and I say, and I knew there's all the fighters in the Chicago area, and because I'd been already writing for Ring Magazine and writing for Kale and everything. So I said, you know what, I'm here. They don't have to fly me anywhere. I'm going to just tell them I'll do stuff for free to help you get this thing started.
Hmm.
They said, great. So I helped them with fighter information, with all kinds of things. And I did that for about, I don't know, 3 months, but 4 or 5 shows or whatever. And then they said, they interviewed me once on the show about my book, right? So and I think they were curious to see me on camera just to see if there was anything I might contribute, and they liked it. And then one night, Tommy Hearns was doing. They had Tommy Hearns. They had guest people rotate with the play-by-play guy, who I think that night was Sam Rosen, and of course, great hockey announcer and a very good boxing announcer as well. So they I was there, and Tommy was struggling. It just wasn't going super well. So I thought, well, maybe we'll bring another voice in and see what this feels like. So I was at ringside. They said, "Would you want to sit in for a little bit?" I said, "Sure." So I sat in. They liked what I did, and 2 weeks later, they gave me an assignment to go out to Las Vegas to do the color commentary on the fight, and that was it. And then they kept liking what I did, and because they were back then, if you can imagine, right? They to save money, they had uh, they had for the analyst, if you were west of the Mississippi, you did all those fights. I did those. East of the Mississippi, Randy Gordon did all the fights. So
Okay.
very interesting. And it wasn't initially a cost cutting measure, which I thought was intriguing. But anyway, so I then started doing the Vegas fights, the ones in Chicago. Eventually, there weren't ones in Chicago, and then eventually, over the course of a couple of years, I just ended up doing all the fights.
Yeah. Did you ever think ESPN would get to like where it is now, the worldwide leader of sports?
There were many times where everybody wondered that. There were times when people were worried about its very existence. We all worried about, there were various incarnations. I mean, they were taken over by several different entities. Finally, when they got with ABC, was when I think we all kind of said, well, now I think, it seems a little bit more stable, right? There was Cap Cities for a while, a couple other things. But when they got with ABC, it felt like there was likely it wasn't going to go away. And then of course it did start growing, and exponentially. And and when I left there, here's the perfect guidepost. I wrote about this in my book. The Christmas party that they had, the first Christmas party was that I went to, which was 1982 or something. It was at the Holiday Inn in Plainville, Connecticut, right?
Okay.
With about 150 people, maybe 200. And Dick Vitale and I were tasked with we had the task of pulling a name out of a hat for a raffle ticket for the two prizes, the big prizes for the raffle. Those prizes were 24-inch black and white televisions. And so one of those lucky 102 of those lucky 150 people won those prizes. And then fast forward to, I'm going to say maybe 1999 or something. I go to the ESPN Christmas party, and there's 5,000 people there in a giant hall, right? So tells you the growth of that organization. It was quite a quite a evolution.
That's amazing that you got to like see it go from nothing, this business kind of hanging on by a thread, to now this.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
yeah,
It
it's
was like
amazing.
community. This, when it started, it felt like almost like community theater, right? Because we're, cable TV was inventing itself anyway, right? At
Yeah,
that
yeah.
point.
Hmm.
And we felt like we were part of the process of inventing cable TV. There hadn't been a 24-hour sports channel, and there hadn't been, there were no, it was like there was a layer of people that had come over from networks like Scotty Connell and a bunch of other people, and they were old, experienced sports guys, but most of everybody else was younger, and we were making our way, trying to make the rules up as we went along.
Okay, all right. Uh, so in 1992 and in 1996, you were part of the boxing analyst team in the Olympics. What was that experience like?
It went on Barcelona. Of course, I had never done the Olympics, and I was really excited to do it. And the 1992 games in Barcelona were really, the city is an astonishing place. Though when you're there for the Olympics, you can't really experience it as much as you like because you're so busy. Um, that was the last Olympics where boxing was still part of the mainstream coverage of NBC. And it was the year Oscar De La Hoya won his gold medal, and we had several other fighters do very well. And it was really a fun experience. I enjoyed it. The only thing I didn't enjoy, and I got to experience it again in 1996, was when you're there seeing the nationalism, the favoritism, and all the things that are done to athletes at the Olympics that are really unfair. It happened in boxing, it happened in all the sports because we go visit the other sports, but it happened a lot in the boxing. And that was distressing because you feel bad for those fighters.
Yeah, yeah. It still happens to this day,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
it does.
Yeah.
And it's just the one part that's a little off-putting.
Well, so what happened between 1992 and 1996 that boxing wasn't part of no longer the mainstream? Because if I'm not excuse me, Oscar De La Hoya became a star after becoming a gold
He
medalist.
did. He
I,
became
I
a
would
star.
think ABC would go, hey, listen, we produced one, we can produce another one in 96.
Well, here's the thing. NBC was doing the Olympics, okay? They didn't have any boxing on their network, okay? And they had no affiliates that did boxing. So the sport was not, so there wasn't a corporate interest in it. And here's what, it was right at the time when they all were realizing that the ratings were driven for the most part from gymnastics uh, and other sports of that ilk that brought in more women, that brought in a wider audience. Now, in my opinion, they overreacted to that because here's the thing. So boxing it was like a cliff. They didn't just gradually or wean boxing out of the main part of it, or find a way to still, because you're covering the Olympics, you have some responsibilities to at least cover the main sports. And boxing, while it was more of a niche sport, still maybe at that point was still a major sport for the United States.
Hmm.
They It fell off a cliff. They threw it all on this triple cast, I think. And the rest, we were supposed to do fights. In 1996, I called, I don't know, maybe 100 fights that never made air, not
Wow.
even highlights of them. And what I couldn't understand, this is probably why I didn't get asked back. I once said to, I think it was Dick, the gentleman who produced Saturday Night Live, married Dick.
Let's just call him Dick because that's exactly what he is for taking boxing away.
Yeah, so I can't remember his name. Dick is his first name. Yeah. Anyway, I said to him that I said, I said, I think I was very respectful in the way I did it. I said, it seems like this was after Floyd Mayweather beat a Cuban fighter, I think, for the first
Hmm.
time in I don't know how long anyone American had done it. And they didn't even show a highlight, nothing. Even in the late show, they didn't nothing. It was like it didn't exist. And I said to him, I said, I said, I know the gymnastics and everything, it drives a lot of the
Viewership.
viewership, but isn't there a way on the broadcast to show just a round of Mayweather, and you're going to get right back to the gymnastics and say, look, something dramatic occurred today. The American fighter beat the Cuban for the first time in 20 years, and pretty remarkable. I said, wouldn't that make sense? And wouldn't that be our responsibility to the viewers who have for a long time seen boxing on here? And he just said he wasn't interested in what I was saying. Neither was the other executives. So they
I,
just they couldn't see it. It was such a black and white issue to them that they couldn't figure out a way to a nuanced way around it.
Yeah, I just think it's a shame that boxing has been such regulated, and we might not even have boxing in the Olympics. It's a shame because it's one of the original Olympic sports back
Right.
when it was only, I believe, eight. I could be wrong on the number, don't quote me, but it was one of the original sports in the Olympics. I would think coverage of the sport would be important. I mean, to be fair, the sport doesn't help himself with the corruption in the
No, of
Olympics.
course not.
It's just horrific. It's I I remember Teddy Atlas was covering one, and I thought he almost blew a blood vessel.
Yeah, it looked like he was going to have a heart attack on the air, didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it did. It did. So what Olympic memory sticks out to you? Like, what's your best or favorite Olympic memory of you working the Olympics?
Oh gosh, it probably was. It probably was everything surrounding the De La Hoya story, because it was true. It was a true story. Of course, everybody elevates it. But it was true that he had his mom who had passed away on his mind, and in conversations even with him out there, you felt it. You felt that he felt this was a true quest for him, and that, and in covering it, it was really kind of interesting. He didn't feel like it was just a marketing grab to make himself famous. Uh, Winning that medal, of course, he was aware of that, but that medal meant something to him because he wanted to do it for his mom who had passed away, who really wanted him to do it. And that part was kind of cool to me because he approached it that way. And so that was kind of a cool thing, watching him win the gold. And the other thing that is more of a general part of it, and I'm sure others would say the same thing. When you're covering an Olympics, just like when you're participating in Olympics, you meet the most fascinating and interesting people from around the world. And uh, you're kind of in your own cubicle doing things, but when you can get out and mingle and see the people, you find people that are so interesting and so often, they're from different cultures, they're from different parts of the world, and that part of the experience was good.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. So, circling back to your time at ESPN, after 23 years in 2003, you end up leaving for Showtime. Why that happened?
Wow, that's a complicated story. Okay, so in 1998, I think it was, whenever the boxing series at ESPN became different, right? They moved it to Friday, and they made a studio show, right?
Friday
And
Night Fights.
so they ended up having a studio show and the fight. So originally, I was asked, would you want to do when we go to this format, would you like to do the studio or the fight? And I said, well, I don't know. I said, I might be interested in the studio, even though it means I have to travel every week to Connecticut to do it. I said it would be a different thing and it might be intriguing. The next thing I hear from them after asking that question is, uh, we're not going to use you on the series. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, since I've been doing the the
Top
Top
Rank.
Rank series for 18 years. And I was still signed up to ESPN for 2 more years. So it wasn't like they didn't fire me because I was still with the network. So, okay. And there was a little brouhaha at the time about it. People thought it was odd, but whatever. It's their prerogative. It's their network. So, and I never caused a fuss over it. When I was asked about it, I almost always said no comment. So then I was still at the network, and I, I was doing covering events for Sports Center uh, and working, and Classic Sports Network was very big at that point. So I would do a lot of shows about the older fights, and then I started covering other sports for Sports Center. I played baseball when I was younger, and I'm a big baseball fan. So I would go cover baseball for Sports Center, which was fun, and I really enjoyed doing it. Covered some NBA. One year, I worked on the draft. So I was having what turned out to be a really good year or two while I was doing that. In the meantime, my contract is about to end, and I'm thinking, shoot, they're probably not going to ask me back, so I got to start looking for other things that would work. And to my utter amazement, they called me up and said, all right, well, we're ready do you want to sign a new contract? I almost fell off my chair. I was like, really? It was interesting. So I did it. I'm going to reveal something here that I've never said. So I was at that time starting talks with Showtime to go over and do boxing. It didn't, I won't even lay blame or say exactly why, because it was a little complicated. It didn't quite happen, and so because it didn't happen. I wanted to be employed, of course, so I signed another 2-year contract around 2000, around 2002. I signed another 3-year contract with ESPN. Okay. Now I'm going along and I'm doing the same stuff I was doing before. They kept me off all boxing. It's like as if, there was the remote people that did boxing. They didn't even know my name anymore. Like I was kind of ghost, right? Even they do amateur boxing. They wouldn't put me on that. They didn't put me on anything. And meanwhile, the other parts of ESPN, the Sports Center and Classic Sports part, they were using me extensively everywhere, right? So it was really odd. But anyway, whatever. I'm doing it. And then in 2004, Showtime, I had about 6 months left on 2003 or four, I think. I had maybe 4 months left on my deal with ESPN. And this time I was pretty sure we weren't going to continue. And so Showtime and we started talking because at that time Bobby Ches had some run into some troubles with DUIs and things, and they they weren't going to replace Bobby, but they wanted me to come on the team. I think Ferdy had stopped doing broadcasts on the
Mhm.
at ringside, so it was kind of the perfect timing. And then we got together, and ESPN let me out of my contract, and I went over to Showtime, and it was originally going to be a 3-man booth, but Bobby did not return, so it ended up being me and Steve Albert alone.
All right, all right.
Probably too long-winded an answer, but nonetheless, that's what happened.
Hey, that's fine. That's perfectly fine with me. So throughout over the years, you've ended up commentating some really great fights. I'm not going to get into all of them because we'll be here all day. You've been doing
Yeah,
this for
right.
quite a while, but I do want to stop at certain fights. I want you to tell me what you remember,
Sure.
how was that experience, and so on and so forth. So we'll start off with the best 3-round fight of all time, and
Yeah, right.
I challenge anybody to find a better 3-round fight than Hagler Hearns.
Yeah.
You did that with Al Michaels. Talk to me about that experience. How was that?
That was really unique. I was only 5 years into my broadcasting career. So it's 1985. I'd only been in TV for 5 years. And but I was doing the Top Rank Boxing series. And so the Top Rank people, they said, we're going to put you with Al Michaels. And they're going to put you on the show. Al Michaels is going to do the play-by-play. Kurt Gowdy was the host. So here I was on the show with Kurt Gowdy and Al Michaels. And I'm like, oh my God.
You're five
Uh,
years in.
yeah, it's like, first that alone was pretty daunting. And here's the other part of the story. This was almost like an audition for me Al Michaels was going to probably do the boxing on ABC. And they were at that point wondering who would be his color commentator. It was a little bit of an audition to see if ABC would hire me.
Mm.
And that was part of the reason ABC even pushed for Michaels to be on, because they wanted to see him and me together. Okay, so for me it was really kind of magical to be working with two great great broadcasters, and the fight itself, of course, was uh, was astonishing. It was one of those nights that if you're a part of it, you could never forget, because the electricity, they had that outdoor arena at Caesar's Palace. It wasn't even an arena. They just set in the parking lot. They set up a ring, a whole bunch of chairs. And it was the fact that, you're under the stars, you're in Las Vegas, and that place was just magical. And I did something in that fight that I still now do to this day. When they were walking in, I hit my cuff switch so nobody would hear it the wrong way, so I could get the sound. But I took my headphone off just to look around and listen and get it was right after the walk-in, because I probably talked during the walk-in, and I heard, just to get this atmosphere and let it sink in. I did it just when they were getting ready to get their instructions, and I do that now in almost every fight I do. I just want to get a feeling for 2 seconds of what's it feel like in this arena right now. And I did it then because I felt so lucky to be a part of it. I wanted to have some organic connection to it. It was really remarkable. And everybody on the planet was at that fight. Gary Shandling, who later became a good friend of mine, he has a great line. He said, he had to go do his show that night at Caesar's Palace. He was he was performing with Joan Rivers. And he said, yeah, I only had time for a 3-round fight, so that was good. They tailored that fight perfectly for him.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Another fight. Well, this is fights actually that I want you to talk about. Vasquez versus Marquez. They went at it 4 times.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna have you go individually, but can you just talk to me about that experience of covering those fights? Those fights were just absolute wars.
I mean, it's one of the best, rivalries that we've seen in boxing in 50 years, right? Two men who were each terrific, each great, making the perfect matchups. And it culminated. Well, it didn't culminate because they did have that fourth fight that was won by
Marquez.
Marquez. Yeah, thank you. Uh, and I think Vasquez was not quite what he was in those earlier fights, but still Marquez gets credit for the win, of course, as he should. But the third fight was the one that, again, in an outdoor setting that has become an iconic setting, even in a relatively short period of time, the tennis center at in Carson, California, with next to the soccer stadium. It's had four different names, right, over the course of time. The sponsors
I
switch.
call it the StubHub Center. You can't
Yeah,
confuse
StubHub
it.
Center. Yeah, it feels like it
Home
could be.
Depot Center, Affinity
And now
Insurance.
it's Infinity.
Oh my
Right.
goodness.
Oh,
Yeah.
by the way, I'm going to stop here and tell you a story, and I'll come back to this. I
Okay.
was at the. It was when it was called the. What was it called? Something. The home. Uh, the Home Depot Center. So they came to me, and it was a fight we were doing about Victor Chinian was in it and whatever. And the fans, it was bad weather, really bad weather, but a fair number of fans came anyway. And and that was kind of a little bit part of the story. So Steve Albert was supposed to lead me, and I was going to talk about that. And he leads me, and I said, yeah, I said, one thing about these fans, they're knowledgeable, and they're passionate about boxing. When they come to the Home Box Office Center, they enjoy themselves. Home Box Office Center. That is, of course, the name of HBO, our competitor, instead of Home Depot Center. And Steve Albert looks at me and he said, "Well," he said, that's your YouTube moment, isn't it?" I said, "Yes, it is." I didn't get fired over that, which is good.
Good.
Anyway, that fight at the Home Depot Center, right,
Yeah.
was miraculous. It's one of the best fights I've announced. Uh, it was just, I mean, an astonishing fight, and both men were amazing. It was a star-studded audience, from Jack Nicholson to Sylvester Stallone to whoever else you want to mention, and those two men laid everything on the line, and it came right down to the end, and could have gone either way. It was just an amazing experience.
For sure. Now, and you can I'll ask you to talk about this fight, and you can also answer this question as well. Is this the best fight you ever covered? Jose Luis Castillo versus Diego Corrales. Talk to me about that fight, and is that the best fight you ever covered?
Yeah, it is. I know it's impossible to choose, right? Because we've done so many. So you would think it would be really, really hard. But I'll tell you, every time I think about it, I don't mind answering the question that way, because it wasn't just that there were so many elements. It was fought skillfully. It was fought with amazing courage and guts. It had many, many surprising elements to it, including a dramatic finish. I mean, you start out with the fact that here we have these two really amazing offensive machines, and Diego Corrales, who had kind of altered his style a little bit in the fights just previous to that to box more. Joe Goosen had been just there training him, and he'd been very, very effective with it against Casamayor and I think a couple other guys. And it would make sense for Diego Corrales to make sure he kept distance, still land power punches, land a left hook on the right hand for sure, but not to get on the inside and rumble with Jose Luis Castillo, who was a monster on the inside, right? Round one, Corrales comes out, marches right to Castillo, and starts banging away with him on the inside. And I commented on the fight. I said, look, Diego Corrales is doing okay on the inside, which he was. I said, but is this really the smartest way for him to fight this fight? Can he sustain this against this guy? And of course he did. there were moments, of course, when it looked like he wasn't gonna, but they produced round after round that could have been called rounds of the year, right? I mean, as you look at each round of that fight, you can almost make a case for 5 or 6 of them being round of the year. And then we get to round number 9, and uh, Corellis sent down twice, had the presence of mind to spit his mouthpiece out, which gained him a little extra time, even though Tony Tony Weeks, I guess it was going to take a point away from it. So by the time that round would have ended with the 2 knockdowns and the point deduction, Diego Corrales would have been in a position where he had to win by knockout, right?
Mm-hmm.
As it turns out, of course, in that very same round, as Castillo's trying to put him away, he lands a right hand that Corrales does that changes everything. And then he gets Castillo in such trouble that the referee had to stop the fight. And by the way, we have there are little moments in your broadcasting career that, when you've done, I mean, you have your cringe-worthy moments where things like the Home Depot thing, and I can name you a number of others. And then you have your little moments where you say, okay, that was good. I added to the broadcast. I saw that right hand very quickly from Corrales, and it was a kind of a subtle thing, but I commented on it right away, and I took a chance at saying this could be a fight-changing thing, and it was. So I was happy. And in fact, we haven't gotten to the broadcasting part much, but maybe we will.
Yeah.
That fight I worked with Steve Albert. To me, is one of the best announced fights that I've been involved with. We were both very proud that we didn't try to overtake the action. We didn't try and steal the spotlight from it, overtalk it. I believe, and most people have said this, we let the action speak for itself.
No, for sure. I'll rewatch it tonight, and I'll pay attention to the commentary.
See
I'll
if
get
that's
back
true.
to you.
If you disagree, you can send me a text. Say, Al, you ignorant slut.
No.
You were terrible.
Honestly, that fight was so good. I doubt when I was watching.
Probably weren't even listening to us.
Yeah, right. All right. Another fight I want to talk to you about is the biggest financial success in boxing history, Pacquiao Mayweather. Talk to me about covering that fight.
Well, you could write a book about that, and I actually thought about it. Because but that's a book I'd probably have to write that book after I'm not broadcasting boxing anymore, which hopefully I have a couple more years left doing. But yeah, it was interesting because it was HBO and Showtime merging to do that fight, right? And that had happened once before when Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson fought, where they merged Showtime and HBO. Now, when the first fight happened, HBO was more the lead guy on that. But when this one happened, it was more Showtime as the lead broadcaster. Really? So we had to get past all the logistics and of all that stuff, which was intriguing at best. And it's kind of like, a détente between two nuclear powers. And we got past that. Okay, pretty okay. And here was this fight with, the people that waited for forever. And it was, highly anticipated. It didn't turn out to be the greatest fight of all time. It wasn't probably as bad as some people say when you look back on it, but it wasn't a great fight. And we also know now that Pacquiao's undisclosed injury may have added to that. But it was a historic event to be part of for a variety of reasons, because of the TV thing, and then just because it was a fight that people had wanted forever. So sometimes when you're just a part of that, it kind of, it's a unique experience.
Yeah. I I I think that fight happened 4 to 5 years too late.
Yeah,
Not
probably.
not that there were, complete shot out of their prime, but they definitely were better 4 or 5 years
Oh
before.
yeah, even 3 years ago, they would have been better. Yeah,
Totally agree. My
yeah.
question to you is, had that fight happened 3, 4, or 5 years before, would the result have been different in your
I
opinion?
think it would have been much more. I think it having it earlier. It seems. I always thought when they were in that earlier period, I always thought that the volume punching of Pacquiao was going to be a little bit of a problem for Mayweather.
Mhm.
Because Mayweather, a lot of time you could steal rounds from Mayweather if you had volume punching. And I always thought that was one of the things that Pacquiao could use to be helpful. By the time we got that fight, he wasn't that fighter anymore. Now, that doesn't mean he would have beaten Mayweather in the previous incarnation, because Mayweather is Mayweather, and he's very adept at making volume punchers into non-volume punchers. But the guys that were able to do it, like Castillo when he fought him, and Maidana, they were effective against Floyd Mayweather, and you can make a case uh, in the first
Castillo.
Castillo fight that he won against Mayweather, and you can make a case in the first Maidana fight. I thought that one should have been a draw, but I don't know if you make a case for a win by Maidana, but maybe, and certainly a draw. It was, I thought Pacquiao would have benefited from that, but would he have beaten Mayweather? I don't know.
Yeah. I agree that the fight would have definitely been different. Now, who if he would have got the win, I'm not sure, but
It would have felt like a different fight.
yeah, because we seen Mayweather hurt. Really, he was dropped by Zab Judah. If we really want to take it there, who's a southpaw, a
Yeah,
fast southpaw. Chop Chop Corley hurt him real bad
right.
at one point, and who's a southpaw. So I'm not saying he had trouble with southpaw. The guy's undefeated, but it definitely was it definitely was something to look at. I feel.
Oh
But,
yeah, no question.
yeah. So, what would you? Oh, so this will be the last, I guess, series of fight I want to talk about. It's not exactly one fight, but the Super Six series
Mm,
with Andre Ward. I absolutely loved it, and I think that boxing definitely should go towards
yeah,
more tournaments. I feel like it creates a playoff type atmosphere for boxing, for non-boxing fans, where it's like, oh, X fighter is going to fight Y fighter, and the winner of that fight
yeah,
is going to fight
right.
the winner of this fight, and
I
then
agree.
it creates kind of like a bracket kind of thing.
Yeah, it's fun.
Um,
E- oh, good.
no, I was going to say, covering that Super Six series. What did you think about it, and what do you think about tournaments in general?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. There was one thing that turned out to be a flaw for the Super Six, and that was that it went on too long,
I agree.
and it should have been probably single elimination or something like that. But it didn't seem fair to have it be single elimination, and I understand why the format was what it was. But we had injuries, we had a few things. It went on long. That was the only bad thing you can say about the Super Six because it produced great fights. It created rivalries. It created a star in Andre Ward, and it was very competitive and compelling boxing, and had all kinds of other side stories like the disqualification of Durrell when he fought Abraham and
Abraham,
other
yeah.
things that happened. So I like the idea of tournaments. I think they're fantastic. I really do. Even the 4 man, we used to have a lot of, when I was on ESPN, we used to have a bunch of tournaments. We had where it would be, just single elimination, but we'd have 8 fighters and they'd be, we'd call it the ESPN welterweight tournament, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
they would fight. It was great. And then on Showtime, we had mini tournaments where we'd have the bantamweight division, which
I
is a
remember.
great division, where
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
my current partner Abner Mares fought. And I always tell Abner the two fighters that during that era that fought the most amazing competition were Carl Froch and Abner Mares. If you look down their resume, they fought over every single fight was against some kind of monster that was good,
Mhm.
a really good fighter. And so I like the idea of tournaments. Super Six was really interesting. There's a lot of drama to it. Plus, there's even the machinations to get certain fights to happen. And in the ring, there were excellent fights. Kessler versus Froch. Ward when he upset Kessler in the first round of the tournament. That was, surprising and amazing. So we had some interesting fights in that tournament, and we got to be introduced to Carl Froch's girlfriend, now his wife, sitting at ringside, who was a beautiful young lady, very vocal in her support of Carl Froch in one of the
I rem-
fights. She was sitting right behind Steve Albert and Steve Farhood, and you could hear her more than you could hear Steve and
and Albert.
Steve. And some of her language was pretty colorful. So luckily it was on cable.
Yeah, I remember her
She
yelling.
became a star from that.
Yeah. Currently, I feel like 140 is a division that could use a nice tournament.
Oh God! Wow, wouldn't
Yeah.
that be great? Yeah.
What?
Well, I am a believer that the 140-pound division now in boxing is the deepest in the sport. It's
I,
amazing how many good
I
fighters up and down the
yeah.
lines. But yeah, that would be a great division. That would be the division to do a tournament in, because if you did choose correctly, you'd have 8 people, let's say, that any one of those 8 people might beat the other 8.
No, and Showtime, I guess PBC, they have enough 140s to
I
do it.
think they probably do. So maybe, and I know some. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
you got
should. They should have enough available to them,
yeah,
and it'd be nice if you could lure somebody else there. But they should have enough that you can make a great tournament. Listen, we just saw what I thought was one of the fight of the years,
I agree.
um,
I agree.
with Akhmedov and Sims. I
Hmm.
mean, Kenneth Sims gave a career best performance, and Akhmedov did what he does. He's really a good fighter and one of the most hard luck fighters in the sport. But those 2 guys, a perfect example. They would be in if they were in that tournament. You'd give them a
Yeah,
chance against anybody.
I totally agree. All right. So what would you say is your best call, like, in a fight?
Um, it might be as a color commentator, it might be the Corrales. It's hard to choose, but might be the Corrales Castillo fight, and because it's turned out to be such an iconic fight. As a play-by-play announcer, and one of the other best nights I've ever had as a broadcaster was doing the Barkley Duran fight,
Okay. All
which
right.
was astonishing. And the great Gil Clancy, was working with me, and Gil was kind of a mentor to me when I came into the boxing world in 1980. He really took me under his wing. He was very helpful, very giving, and a savant. Gil was a savant of the sport, and he would pick things up before. I mean, listen, if you're a commentator, you have several jobs. One is to give anecdotal information about the fighters that hasn't been given by the play-by-play man that you think are pertinent or interesting. Number
Hmm.
2 is to analyze the action you're seeing, and number 3 is to foreshadow what might come. Now, that third part is a tricky one. Uh, and no human being that ever announced boxing was better at that than Gil Clancy. He would tell you something and bang, 2 rounds later, there it was. So doing that fight with him was magical, and the night was magical. It was a snowstorm in Atlantic City. Fans, we didn't think anyone was going to show up. It looked like, and in the early on, there wasn't that many people there, and you slowly saw it start filling up. By the time we had the main event, the arena was full. It was like some magical thing. Uh, and later, I talked to one guy. I said, "Wow, how did you even get here, and what motivated you to do it?" He said, I had a ticket to see a Roberto Duran, man. Nothing was going to stop me from getting this. I think that was the motivating thing. And of course, it was a brilliant fight in which Iran Barkley ironically fought maybe the best fight of his life. And to this day, to be honest, I feel Barkley deserved the decision. But uh, nonetheless, it was a brilliant fight. And Phil and I worked, I was very happy with what I did in that fight. And I've done maybe 30% of the fights I've done play by play, 20%. And I enjoy doing it a lot. It's something different. So that would be the best play by play one, probably Corrales Castillo as a color commentator.
Okay. How'd you feel about your call in the Tank Davis Santa Cruz fight where you're like,
Mm,
if
Thank
Santa
you for
Cruz
bringing
gonna
that up. Thank you. I appreciate it. That was great. Yeah, there's one of those moments where you and I didn't phrase it quite the way I wanted to phrase it. On
Mhm.
top of the fact that it turned out to be, of course, not a good comment to make at the moment. For those people that don't know, it had to do with uh, the first 4 or 5 rounds of the Santa Cruz Davis fight were very exciting, right? They were give and take.
Very.
And Santa Cruz was fighting probably the wrong fight. He wasn't staying as much outside. There was very little movement. He was engaging with Davis, but not doing that badly. And I think some of the judges had him winning 2 or 3 of the rounds. And I said, the way I phrased it, which wasn't the way I wanted to phrase it, was I think I said something like, "Well, if the Davis people thought he was going to fold because of Davis's power, that's not happening yet." Literally, the second I finished that statement, he hits him with that giant uppercut.
Yeah.
And what and I was like, oh my God, it was terrible. I phrased it in such a way that it almost made it sound like, hey, this guy's not going anywhere. When I really wanted to say the way I wanted to say it was so far, but I didn't, and I did say to this point, but I didn't emphasize the so far so that it looked like I was making this grand proclamation that
Mhm.
Santa Cruz, hey, he can stand up the power of Davis. That's not what I really meant, but
Yeah.
I said it in an odd way, and so that was terrible. Yeah, that was one of those ones when it's out of your mouth, you wish you could take it back.
No, but just know us fans, we didn't. You've earned enough leeway with us where it wasn't like, oh man, get this guy off TV. No, it was kind of
Yeah,
like
whether if
that's
yeah,
how.
well, you hope so anyway. And there were a lot of people that were there were some people that gave me a hard time over it, and I get it. You can't, but that was, and there have been other times where I've said things that didn't weren't quite correct or were off the beam, and you just you live with it. You listen. You're doing. The interesting thing is when you do a 3 to 4 hour live uh, TV show and you're reacting to things that happen and you're trying to use the right information that you have to talk about it, there are going to be times during that 3.5 hours that you're going to do something that isn't as perfect as you wanted to do it.
For sure.
It's just inevitable, right? And you hope that those things are limited and that they're not dramatic. That was one of the dramatic ones, and you hope that you don't ruin anything.
Okay. How long do you see yourself doing this for? You've been doing this since 1980.
Yeah, I know, amazing, huh? Isn't
43
that crazy?
years.
Here's the funny thing. I enjoy it. I feel like I'm still doing it as well as I did it before. I have my role is such that the things that are required of me, and I have a very specific view of what's required of a commentator, and the Showtime way of doing things is the way I like to do boxing. So, I, I in terms of doing that specific job, it you know I know all the right things to do still, and I prepare as diligently as I ever did, maybe more so. I'm going to say I probably prepare even more now because, and I'm going to be honest with it, right? I don't want to have broadcasts where somebody says, well, he lost the fastball, right? You know,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
guy, he lost his fastball. He doesn't quite have it anymore. You know, he's not paying attention. He's not doing the right thing. As long as I do this for however long, I don't want that to happen. Uh, and if it is happening, it would be a sign to me to stop doing it. I would like to do it for a couple more years. Um, I enjoy doing it. I love the process. I love the process of preparation, even, and I love the process of doing it. Um, I enjoy the group of people I'm doing it with immensely, both in front of and behind the camera. And I love the sport of boxing.
Yeah. If you love what you're doing, it isn't work. So just
It
keep
really
doing
isn't.
it
And
as long as
yeah,
you're enjoying it. Yeah.
yeah, really isn't. So yeah, that's why I'd love to continue for a little while longer.
Yeah. What do you make of the current state of boxing? I feel like now fights take a little longer than they used to back in the day.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of times we don't get fights we want due to
Yes.
promotional network issues. And
Yeah. Sure.
although those things did happen in the past, I feel like it's been magnified probably since like 2000, like 10, 11, like sometime around there. So what
Yeah.
do you make of the current state of boxing and the future of boxing as well?
Well, the product that boxing is putting out there is pretty good. And I'm going to separate this into two categories because it needs to be. Women's boxing, which is gaining traction,
Hmm.
is as good as it could possibly be at this moment. Every single match gets made that puts the best women out there against the best women. Somehow, magically, that side of the sport managed to conquer all the demons that exist in the male side. Okay, so that's one thing. But of course, the women don't command as much attention as the men, but are constantly getting that on a higher level.
Hmm.
In on the male side, they're the actual product of boxing in the last couple of years has been, in my mind, very good. And this year, tremendous. There have been so many great fights. And I'm saying that not as a cheerleader for boxing, just an honest statement. We've had really, really good fights. Now, you make the point that getting the fights that people want to see has been more difficult. And it has been more difficult because of the all those promotional and network and other ties that make it hard. and and that's always the bugaboo for boxing. That's always the thing, even going back to the day of the Don Kings and Bob Arums ruling the world along with main events or whatever. It wasn't always we see all those great fights being made, and mostly they were, but that wasn't always so easy either. But now you know, it's become more difficult. And the casual sports media, there's always a poster kid for boxing not making that fight. Ergo, there's no great fights in boxing. So, perfect example is Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford is one of those poster kids, right? That fight still hasn't been made. Hopeful that it gets made in the next couple of months. They're negotiating again. We hope it's going to happen. Everybody does in boxing, but there was a Mayweather Pacquiao was that fight for a while, and so what the casual sports media does is it takes one thing and conflates it, and they've done that about boxing all the time. Boxing is much more of a niche sport right now or is more of a niche sport now than it was in the 80s or in the beginning of the 90s. Middle 90s, the boxing started to not be covered. The late 90s, boxing started to not be covered as much by the mainstream sports media. That was the catalyst that started the sport becoming more of a niche sport.
Hmm.
Um, if a tree falls in a forest, did it really fall if no one sees it? There were great fights in the early 2000s between Pacquiao and Marquez and Estrada or Morales, and Barrera. I mean, that group of fights as good as what the Four Kings did, but it didn't, it was on a premium sports network, HBO. It didn't get the kind of coverage from like I was at ESPN at the time. I couldn't get Sports Center to cover those fights. I said, I'm in Vegas. You'd say, well, we can't break into the coverage or whatever. So we'll just do a line or two on it. We won't be able to do real coverage. And that was where, it wasn't just ESPN. The newspapers were starting to be less important, and they didn't cover the sport. So the average sports fan didn't know who the boxers were, and they couldn't create stars. And that's been the issue. However, boxing has gotten a little more mainstream coverage in the last several years. And with that has at least come a renewed interest in the sport. And the product is great. So I think boxing has kind of found its niche where it needs to be if the powers that be can continue to make really good fights.
Okay. All right. So I just have a few more questions, and then you've been very gracious with your time, and then I'll let you go. So Canelo seems to be slowing down a bit. I'm not saying he's out of his prime or he's
Yeah,
shot. I'm just saying he's slowing down.
sure.
Uh, what do you make of his career, and like where do you rank him amongst the great Mexican fighters?
Yeah, that's such an interesting topic and debate these days. I did a number. I announced a number of Canelo's fights. He
Yeah, for
did,
sure. Mhm.
a fair amount of them anyway. And look, anybody that's subjective about Canelo has to understand he fought a very good. His resume is a good resume. Some people complain sometimes when he doesn't fight fighter A, B, or C, but in general, it's a very good resume. Uh, he has almost always won. Sometimes decisions seem like they went for him that other people thought could have gone the other way. It's true with a lot of fighters. Um, but you have to. I'm not big on ranking people anyway, so I'm not really going to rank them. I can't stand lists. I mean, you've probably seen a lot of my tweets about the pound for pound list. I can't. It doesn't. For some reason I can't get into that, and so it's hard to rank. But certainly he's one of the best Mexican fighters that ever lived. And then there's the other side to it that you have to give the man credit for. He has been a lightning rod for the sport. He's been somebody that is in the Hispanic community, especially, but then even beyond it, has brought attention and people to the sport of boxing. So it's like Oscar De La Hoya did, right? Or Roy Jones did, or Mike Tyson did. You can look at certain fighters and they brought people to the sport. Mayweather is an example, Pacquiao, we could name a number of them, but Canelo's done it in a very big way, and for that he gets credit. And he's been a very good fighter. He's faced the challenges. I thought he got to be a better fighter as time went on. He was willing to fight Mayweather when he was younger, right? And he lost that fight. What did he do? He went back to the drawing board, and I think he got better. And then he went up and fought all these bigger guys. Then, he started at 154, right? And he loses to this guy who's truly a welterweight, right? So
Yeah.
now he's fighting 175-pound guys, right? Later, how does that happen, right? And beating them. So you have to give him credit for that. And I think he will go down in history as one of the great Mexican fighters, and really one of the biggest boxing attractions in the sport.
Okay. I'm known as the voice of Dominican boxing. So I interview everybody, but I mostly focus on the Dominicans.
Oh, okay.
What do you make of the recent rise of Dominican boxing and how
Fascinating and great. Dominican. There have been many great Dominican fighters in the past. And there was a little lull period, just like Puerto Rico has had a little lull period for other than Amanda Serrano and a few other people. Sometimes it happens, right? Sometimes it's just. But I think it's great, and they've produced so many great fighters. kind of a little glitch in the road for Alberto Puello after this last incident with the PEDs, but there's no reason to think he can't rise up and come back from that. But there are so many good Dominican fighters, and we've done a lot of them on
Sure.
Showtime. And it seems like Bob Santos manages or trains every single person in the sport of boxing these days. All of a sudden, I know Bob for years. All of a sudden, he has every fighter.
Every Dominican fighter, yeah. There's not a card I put on. I don't see
Yeah,
Bob in the corner.
I
Yeah,
saw him at the fights this week, and it was funny. I said, "Of course you're here," right? But and it goes beyond the Dominicans even.
no,
But
for
yeah,
sure.
the Dominican fighters are doing a really good job. I was one of the people that said when Garcia was going to fight, who did he have the big
Colbert,
up? Pardon?
Colbert,
Colbert.
yeah.
Uh, my broadcast mates didn't understand the idea that Garcia could win that fight. Of course, he was a big underdog. For whatever reason, they just didn't feel. And I said to them, I said, and I'm not that I'm this great prognosticator, but I said, Hector Garcia hasn't had a chance to fight a big fighter. But I said, look at this video. He has a shot in this fight, and sure enough, he did. And then he won a title. Ultimately lost to Davis. I think that was a bridge too far for him because it was the wrong weight, and he
I
wasn't
thought he
quite ready
fared
for
well.
that.
I thought he fared well in that fight. I thought he did okay
Pardon?
up until he got touched.
Yeah, he wasn't fighting badly, and so he's they have a. I mean, Adamas, of course, is great. We're going to see him on the main event. He's a terrific fighter who needs at some point to get a shot at a middleweight title.
That WBC, man, I don't know what they doing over
Yeah,
there. It's
it's
crazy.
very odd because at this point, really, Charlo needs to defend his title, and we will see Adamas this in June fighting, and if he wins that fight, he certainly can lay claim to the idea that he should get a world title shot.
So out of all the Dominicans, Elvis Rodriguez, Carlos Adames, Hector Luis Garcia, Edwin De Los Santos, like who do you like most? Who do you think like
Boy, you mentioned Edwin De Los Santos too, who's really good. I mean, he's fun to watch. It's exciting. But I could say that about all those fighters that they're fun to watch.
Yeah, for sure.
They really are. Every one of them. And it's not because they're crazy wild brawlers. They're good technicians, but they entertain when they fight.
Every single one of them.
Every one of them does. If given the opportunity, sometimes you can be in a fight where someone can deaden it a little bit, but every one of them bring that ability to it. And boy, who would I? I mean, I like all of them really. Adamas is an interesting one because I get the feeling that even when he gets in against the upper echelon guys as he's headed toward, I think he's going to create a firefight in every fight, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And that part's fascinating, of course. You hope it, from his standpoint, he has to hope it doesn't spell any kind of doom. But he's pretty amazing. He's interesting to me because he just damn the torpedoes full speed ahead, right? And he wants to create a knockout and create but they're all good. I love them all. I love Dos Santos. I like Alberto Puello. Now, I'm going to just put in a disclaimer. I thought he lost to Akhmedov. I would have given that decision after looking back at the fight to Akhmedov by a very narrow margin. However, he fought great in that fight. So
yeah, I was at that fight.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And would have beaten Rolly Romero had they fought.
For sure. Yeah. I thought that was a 50-50 fight that could have gone either way. 7-5.
Yeah, you can make a case for that. Yeah.
Yeah. The scorecards were atrocious, but
I think that added to the distaste. The 117, 111 cards from Puello were ridiculous, and that when you see that, the problem is it taints it a little bit.
Yeah, and as far as this PED test, I believe he has a hearing where he explains why this was in the system. So
right.
I'm hesitant to criticize him until after,
Well, the thing they're saying is that he and his wife wanted to have a child, and that drug, they're saying the issue with them having a child was from his end. So he took that drug and they ended up having their child. I think the problem with that is then you should have filled out the form correctly and explained why you were taking it. Because
Mhm.
it is a drug that is used for men to enhance their performance in boxing.
Mhm.
So I think they handled it very poorly, if that truly is the reason, and it might be. So
Yeah.
that some of that falls on the people around him as well.
I agree. I agree. All right. So again, now getting off boxing, I just want to ask you
Hmm.
just a couple questions, and then I'll let you go. You've been very gracious with your
It's
time.
okay. I'm having a good time.
All right, good. So I heard that you made a few albums and you even made a song for the Olympics. Could you talk to me about your
I
music
did,
career?
yes. Well, I do sing a lot. I perform a lot. First time I performed was before the in Vegas was before the fight between I guess it was Hagler Leonard in '87. They had uh, I was having dinner with the president of Caesar's Palace, and they had a uh, Barry McGuigan's dad had come when Barry was fighting at Caesar's Palace and done 3 nights in the Olympic Lounge there because he was a pub singer in Ireland. So it was a fun thing that they had him come, and all the boxing crowd came there, and Barry McGuigan was fighting, and he thought that was great. And he was talking about it to me, and he said, "Don't you sing?" Because I would sit in with performers in Vegas. He said, "I heard you sing." He said, "You sang with somebody here at Caesars." I said, "Yeah, I like to do music." He said, pounds the table. He said, "Okay, you're going to do what Barry McGuigan's dad did before the Hagler Leonard fight." And I'm like, "Really?" I didn't have a band. I didn't have an act. Uh, I don't have anything. And so he said, "You're going to do it." And I'm like, "Okay." So got my with an entertainment guy I knew in town. He helped produce the show. I did. I went out in this studio. I was living in Chicago at the time, so I had to come out here like 3 weeks before I went. I practiced with tapes that the band made me, and I came out to Vegas, and I was for a week. I was in this studio in the desert working through the show, and we did a couple of shows each night leading up to Hagler Leonard, and it went well. People enjoyed it. It was fun. It was a daunting task. I mean, when I walked on stage, because of the boxing, right? Because of everything, it had gotten a lot of attention, a lot of publicity, and everybody was at that fight. Everybody of any note. So the night before the fight. I mean, I did it Thursday and Friday, I think, before the fight. And I look out at the audience on Friday. I walked out, or first one that even I did. I looked out in the audience. And I'm looking, holy cow! Look at all these people here. And I mean, here's John Madden over here. Here's was big at the time, Mr. T. Here's he was playing in the other thing. Here's Neil Diamond sitting over here because he was
Wow.
playing in the main room. So he's sitting there, and all the boxing guys. And I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into, right? But it worked out okay. It was fun, and everybody enjoyed it. I did 3 or 4 more of those, maybe 5 during the '80s with big fights, and then it got me off on doing performing. And then I made an album of which was songs that were kind of geared to boxing and broadcasting or whatever, specialty songs. And then I did do a song for the Olympics for it was in 1996. It was an Olympic song, and I've continued to perform, and to this day, I do shows over at the Tuscany Hotel in Vegas from time to time. I am planning on doing a show 2 nights before the Spence Crawford fight, if it happens. I
Okay.
was going to do a show 2 nights before Davis and Garcia, but
What date would that be, by the way?
Ah, well, I don't know when
Ah,
it'll be, but whenever I don't really know. I know they're shooting for
text me.
late July.
Text me.
They're shooting for late July, but I don't know. And I don't really have that much inside information. I do know the negotiations
Are
are
ongoing.
undergoing, and that at various times they felt like they're close. So for whatever it's worth, but that's not really any newsflash, is it?
Yeah, yeah, for
I could
sure.
have told you that.
Until they're in the ring, it's gonna be hard for
I
me to.
know. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Exactly. That's one of those fights that until somebody's walking down the through the crowd to get there, you're probably questioning whether it'll happen.
Yeah, for sure. Where can people find your music?
Well, if people want to hear me do it, there's a simple way to hear if they're curious about what I do and can this guy even sing. They could go. I'll tell you what they can do. They can go to YouTube and go to a YouTube channel called Bowtie Cabaret, or it might be something like that, because it's the Kenny Davidson show, where I have done a lot of music over the last 4 or 5 years at the Tuscany, and they can go on that website and just punch in my name or find me, and they'll find me doing a lot of songs.
All right, all right. So, are you a hip hop fan? Because I read something that you rapped before.
No, I didn't.
No. Oh, okay.
No, I wish I wish I was more fluent in the hip hop. Morrow, I'm surrounded by people that are Morrow and Brian, and when Paulie Malignaggi was doing the fights, the three of them, we'd be sitting at the desk and they're throwing around all this hip hop, and I knew maybe 4 of the names of the 12 guys that they were saying, and I'm like,
Okay.
yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, I mean there are hip hop songs I like. It's not a genre I know that much about.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not. It's not my main wheelhouse, but I know a little bit about it. But I don't. I wouldn't profess to to be somebody to do it. I don't think I do a lot of blues songs, so
Okay.
that I do.
All right.
But
All right.
they're more traditional blues tunes.
All right. Do you have time to take some calls from the fans that are watching us currently? If not, that I
Let's take a
totally.
couple calls.
Yeah. All right, guys. I'm gonna put the link in the chat if anybody wants to call in and ask Al a question. He's already been very gracious with his time. Just please keep it short.
Yeah, I got about 6 or 7 more minutes for you.
There you go. So in 6 or 7 minutes, if you guys don't call in, you guys will miss the chance to call in for a Hall of Famer. Speaking of that, we actually didn't get into that. How was getting inducted to the Boxing Hall of Fame? How was that?
It was surreal. It was back in 2012, I believe, and it was a pretty amazing experience. You'll appreciate this. At one point, we were going to go up, and there's a Saturday dinner they have where they have this giant dais and they have everybody up there. And the year I was getting inducted was the first time I was, of course, on that dais. And so before you go up, and they introduce you, they have everybody sitting in a chair against the wall, and it's like there's like about 40 people that are on this massive dais. And I kind of saw everybody, and they have your names, so you all sit down. Well, when we all were seated, I found an excuse to kind of get up and like I needed to look at something or was yawning or stretching or doing whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I took a step back and I just looked all the way down the row of all these people. And you know what? It was like the history of boxing from past to present. And I said, oh my God, look at this. Look at these people here. And I mean, I could throw names at you. It was everybody, right? And I'm like, oh my God, this is heaven, right? When I think of sitting and watching boxing with my dad when I was 11 years old, and we're watching the Friday night fights, right? To think that I'd be sitting there with these people, was just mind blowing. And it was, for me, one of the things was, my dad was a big boxing fan, but, he passed away when I was very young, about 11. And so we didn't get that much of a chance, for a couple of years we could watch it together and everything. But he was such a big boxing fan, and he would have gotten such a charge out of, me doing this stuff. So I did think about him. The other guy I thought about a lot was Don Dunphy, who I watched when I was younger and got to know him when I and I know for some of the people listening to this, they might say, "Who's Don Dunphy?" Right? Well, he was
Yeah, yeah.
great, great, great boxing announcer in the 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s. His son Bob Dunphy is a director on our show, and Don Dunphy was very gracious to me. And I interviewed him on ESPN in about 1985 because we were moving the fights to Friday night. And he came to interview, and I was like nervous about interviewing him. I'm like, oh my god! And he was so nice. He put his hand out. He said, "Al, how are you?" You know, I felt great. And my biggest moment ever in boxing, almost superseding the Hall of Fame, was in a magazine article where they were talking to Don Dunphy, and they said, "Well, who's your favorite boxing announcer now?" And he said me. And I was like, okay, that's it's the Sally Field moment, right? When she says, you like me, right? So that was big. But I was thinking of them when and I didn't mention them in my induction speech. It was very daunting. Listen, that's a place for the great fighters, and they're very inclusive and kind to include people that do things that are an adjunct to the boxers. And I think when I was inducted, I was about the seventh broadcaster that had been inducted, something like that. There's been, of course, a number to follow me, but and I was very excited about that, and it was just amazing weekend. And and the Hall of Fame, for people that don't know, up in Canastota, when they have their Hall of Fame weekend, it is it's different than baseball and football and basketball. Everybody that's honored and everybody that's big in the sport is just kind of there, and people mingle with them, and it's really a unique experience. I urge any boxing fan to do that. If you can find your way up there, it's really a fun event.
I gotta take a trip. I definitely gotta take a
Yeah.
trip.
Oh, you should go. It'll be worthwhile. You'll find it fascinating, kind of funky. It's weird, but it's a small town, right, where it is, and it's not like some glitzy place, but man, the people embrace the event, and it's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. I have a caller calling in. Tip Bayless, how you doing, sir?
Yo, what's going on, Joel? How you doing? How you doing, Al?
I'm doing
Hey,
well.
how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on, by the way. I just had an easy, simple question. This past weekend we got a horrible, horrible decision
Oh,
with Rolly Romero, and I feel
yeah.
like we got a horrible decision with Omar Juarez too. Just with judging and refereeing fights, the decision making. What do you think it would take for us to get an oversight committee in the sport of boxing? Because it's coming to a time where we got to start cleaning up the sport, and we got to start getting the right calls with a lot of these fights.
Yeah, you're right. It's daunting. We had some bad refereeing in the Plant Benavides fight that
Oh,
we called to attention. It didn't end up totally affecting it. Well, maybe it did, but it didn't affect the ultimate outcome. But yeah, I agree with you. Saturday night was kind of like a crescendo of what's been going on, uh, and I would say, the Juarez fight was probably a good example. There was one scorecard in that was like mind bending. That was wide for
They
uh,
had him down at least 5 rounds. I think it was
yeah,
like a
which you think
99,
make
92, something like that.
right. That made no sense. And I would say there was a card, but put in by Tim Cheatham in the Akhmedov Sims fight. He had Sims winning by 4 points in that fight.
no
Now,
way.
now it was a career best performance by Kenneth Sims, and I'm loath to criticize because I don't want people thinking I'm taking away glory from Kenneth Sims. But Batirak Madoff also fought great. How does that an 8-4 fight? You only gave Akhmedov 4 rounds. I just don't understand that. Now, you know, and then we were referencing, the terrible scores with Puello and Akhmedov, and there's been a number of. There's always these outliers. Even when you get the right guy winning, you look at some of these scores and they're ridiculous. And the refereeing is another issue, a separate issue. I have been more critical, and I'm not known as somebody that is that critical of officials. I'm not. I mean, we were talking about Teddy Atlas earlier. He was would have a heart attack over what these guys do, right? But I try to be, fair minded, and I don't like criticizing officials. I've had to criticize referees. We had a fight with when Fundora was fighting Ocampo, I think, or Fundora.
Fundora.
And Jack Reese, the guy was competitive. He was fighting, right? He was
punch harder.
Yeah, he came over like, you're not. If I don't show me something, I'm gonna stop this fight. What? What are you talking about? The guy wasn't hurt. He said, I don't like the way you look. What does that mean? I don't like the way you look. The guy was throwing all kinds of punches, landing body punches. And I ripped him for it. It's just terrible. I mean, I think the state of refereeing in boxing in general isn't that great. There are about 4 or 5 refs that are doing a really good job, like Taylor, Doc. I could name a few others. And honestly, the rest, they're making, and I know it's not that easy a job, but they're making bad decisions. They're making bad decisions that sometimes look like more than incompetence, don't they? Right?
This Saturday for sure. For sure.
Yeah, you hate to say it, but it looks like we were talking about it, like with Tony Weeks. Did they and the commission have it in their mind, because this guy's 40 years old, that somehow we don't want to be the one that gets him hurt, which of course they shouldn't want to, but we're going to take that into account when the fight's happening? I mean, you almost get the feeling, or there's a more sinister answer out there as well that I won't even go into, which I don't think I need to go into, but
for sure.
You know what I mean.
But Tip, thank you so much for the call. I appreciate you. I totally agree. And I know where you're heading with that, and I tweeted about that as well. I'm like, it seemed more than just incompetence, and I hate to say it. I hate to say it, but
you can't really, but it's, and it happens with scoring. It happens with a lot of things, and it's just not good for the sport. It isn't. It taints things, and it's a shame because it has tainted great fights that we've had, this year, where we get through this wonderful fight and then we have to deal with the aftermath of it.
Yeah, for sure. But hey, listen, Al, I want to thank you so much for giving me this interview. It was an absolute honor to have a Hall of Famer on, somebody whose voice I've heard for over 20 years of my boxing fandom. You do a great job. I'm a fan. I wouldn't be interviewing you if I wasn't a fan. And I want to thank you for what you've contributed to boxing. Keep doing a great job. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope we do it again one day.
I did have a lot of fun chatting with you and our one caller. So it was nice. Anytime you want, we can chat, and I appreciate your comments. I because I am thrust into the position based on my job of calling fights that are sometimes, and well, to me, any fight is important because they all mean something to the fighters and they're all about their career. I feel a responsibility to try to do it the right way. I don't want to hurt anyone inside or outside the ring wrongfully by making comments. So I want to be as measured as I can be and talk about what happens without, denigrating a person or anything like that. So I appreciate your comments, and I am going to continue to do it the best way I know how, and hopefully people will still enjoy it.
For sure. And I'm gonna make a prediction right now.
Oh, good.
We're gonna be co-workers in the future.
I like that. I like that. There you go.
Yeah, remember this interview. Remember I said that we're gonna be co-workers in the future, and hopefully Showtime sees this, and they need some new talent up there. They consider
me.
All right, but thank you so much, Al. Again, we'll do it again sometime in the future.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye bye.
Until next time. All right, guys. Everybody, that was Al Bernstein. Please hit that like and subscribe button. I will be going live again tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. Please join me then. We'll be talking about a bunch of stuff about boxing. But until then, till next time, guys. Peace.